Welcome back to another Tactical Fly Fisher on the Water video. This is Devin Olson here. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at some shallow pocket water, which I nymphed through just a couple of weeks ago. I'll show you the flies that I used to catch fish and also the locations where I caught them. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And then come on over to tacticalflyfisher.com afterwards, where we can supply your fly fishing and fly tying gear needs. Thanks for watching. Okay, I'm going to start with the most obvious pocket near me here. Now I've just got a micro thin European nymphing leader on that I've talked about in previous videos, and an adaptive fly fishing, and there's a fish. First cast. I've got about 2.5 to 3 feet of tippet below my wax cider on that leader, and I have a single 2.5 millimeter inverting bead PMD colored Glittergon on, made out of glitter thread. About an 8-inch brown trout there. Good way to start. And I'm just going to make a few casts into each one of these pockets. A lot of them won't even be pockets. So one of the things I want to highlight today is that you don't need an obvious pocket to hold trout, especially brown trout. They love getting in ultra skinny water. And you also don't need a lot of weight when you're fishing a micro leader and a Glittergon or something faster sinking anyway. So I probably won't, I might fish a 3 millimeter bead at some point, but for the most part, even in some of the heavier water here, I'm probably going to stick to a 2.5 millimeter bead inverting. Now I've got a fish that I can see right here. It's just actually out into the fast water, out from this pocket. Oh, and I just missed it. It's one of the great things about shallow pocket water like this. A lot of times you get sight fishing opportunities. Oh. Okay, well that fish is gone now, no big surprise after I missed him. There's another secondary pocket below this rock. This pocket that I just caught that fish out of is kind of split into two by an underwater boulder in the middle that kind of divides the depth. It's deeper on both sides of it, but shallow in the middle, so I'm focusing my drifts either above or below that underwater boulder. All right, we'll move on. Now, when I'm fishing pocket water, I just kind of zigzag through it, looking slowly and very specifically at different spots as I go, because a lot of times having a different angle or perspective will show you water that might hold trout that, like that one, that you didn't see before. So that was a very, very narrow seam. It's not really even something, oops, I lost him. But it's not a traditional pocket per se that people would stop and fish. All it is a seam between these rocks that is a little bit slower than what's around it, and it doesn't even look that slow, but what I noticed was that there was a depression there, just a slight one, coming from a couple of rocks that were a little bit higher in the column in the water above, and that's all it took for that fish to want to sit behind it. So I have another one right here that's just another shallow seam. This is what I call a maybe spot. Might hold a fish, but it's not a really great looking spot. And those are always worth at least a couple of casts, but they're not worth spending a whole lot of time on. So maybe 3 to 5 casts. If you know you've gotten good drifts, then you just move on. Same with this next one. It's a really shallow seam, but not unlike a seam that I've often caught fish in this river on. Instead, I caught a stick. So I'm gonna check my hook. We're good. And I made a couple of good casts in there. It didn't get picked up, so I'm gonna move on. The water's 59 degrees, so even though, you know, in a lot of places we're having really warm and kind of dangerous temps right now for trout, luckily that's not the case on this specific stretch of river. At 59 degrees, they're gonna be willing to be in just about anything. So any water that could possibly hold a fish, they will take advantage of. They'll be in a lot of feeding lies. That's prime metabolic range. So shallow pocket water is a really good place to look, because these are definitely all strong feeding lies. Not, oof, just missed another one there. Not, you know, long time cold water or warm water holding lies when they're focused on conservation of energy. Here they want maximum amount of food, so they're in areas that give them higher volume of water going by their face in a shorter amount of time, so basically just quicker current. Another nice brown trout here, and once again, really shallow pocket, nothing deep about that. Just took that perdigon right in the corner of the mouth. See you later, buddy. That fish was maybe in 10 to 12 inches of water. Pretty shallow stuff. Okay, so I've got all deeper water over here. I'm probably gonna need a 3mm for that. So before I head to that, I'm gonna go back to this side where I have a couple more pockets that are a little bit shallower that I can still fish that 2.5mm fly on. This pocket I'm fishing right here is really complex and turbulent. It's another maybe spot. Not a guaranteed fish holder. And turns out it was deeper and more turbulent than I expected. So next I'm gonna go to this far bank where there's another little seam right there. And that's not as good now that I'm looking at it. And I gotta reapply my wax here because it got wiped down a little bit. So give me 1 second. All right, I just reapplied my wax because it had kind of shifted, touched other parts of the leader and spread it. So wiped it off and reapplied it. I'm gonna make a couple of casts to this pocket that's under the trees on the bank here. Then I'm gonna back up, put on a heavier fly and fish this deeper water that's right in front of me. Now that deeper water is so turbulent on the surface that it's hiding my presence. So even though I'm getting pretty close to those fish, I'm not really worried about it. All right, there we go. Kind of surprising. So that's one good thing about fishing a single fly in an instance like this. Not only can you be a little more accurate, but when you're inaccurate and you land in a tree, you can just jiggle that fly out like I've shown in a previous video. Oh my goodness. Now when you make a cast into a bank spot like this, or really any pocket, you've got to get tension early on in the drift. If you let that fly go for more than a foot or two without having some tension on it, you're never going to know if a fish is eating it. There's so much turbulence going on, and the fish are often so shallow in water like this that if you're not tight right away, they eat it and spit it, and you never know. So reaction time is critical, but also setting it up with some tension for strike detection to begin with. So surprisingly, I didn't catch a fish in that pocket. I wonder if I might have messed up the drift or something in the first couple. I'm gonna go ahead and switch to a 3mm bead right now. to hit this heavier water. Okay, so I have 3mm bead on. This is a soft Hackle carrot. Oh. Oh. So that 3mm is definitely getting down in that pocket, or I don't even know you can call it a pocket, it's more of just a slower seam amid the white water there. Now that's a spot I would have expected to fish, but no dice so far. So we'll move on. Okay. Just gonna put a couple over here to the side of this where it doesn't look as good, but still worth a couple of casts. And then I'm gonna move up, and I don't need that 3mm bead, I don't think, again. So I'm gonna pull it back off. I'm also gonna look behind me, because there's some shallow but smoother and slower water on the bank. I'm gonna give that a gander. I don't see anybody in it, at least to begin with. Okay, this first pocket, I might actually still need that 3mm, so I'm gonna make a couple of drifts with it. And if I'm ticking bottom or under the fish, I think, then I'll go to back to the 2.5. Yep, fish on. So, probably a good thing I left that 3mm bead on for a second, but I'll definitely pull it off once I get to these next couple of pockets. A little better fish here. Nice, very leopard spotted brown trout there. Tons of black spots. Very cool. Fly popped right out. And there you go, fish. Okay, so 3mm bead's coming off. Because most of the rest of the water that's immediately around me, besides that pocket, is slower and or shallower. So I'm back to that 2.5mm bead Glittergon. Again, just a single fly. If you're trying to fit 2 flies in really narrow seams and pockets like this, a lot of times you're kind of just shooting yourself in the foot. Sometimes you have to if you're fishing a thicker European nymphing leader and it's got a lot more sag. Then part of the compromise there to make the casting easier is you may have to fish more weight and you may have to fish 2 flies to get that extra weight. But if you're fishing a micro leader, you can fish a single nymph through most of this type of water and you're just fine. Okay, 2.5mm bead is on. There's a tiny little pocket on the bank here I'm gonna hit first. It's just a small eddy, only about 1.5 feet in diameter on the bank. I don't see any fish in it, and it is pretty shallow, so there might not be, but we'll see. Give it a couple of drifts anyway. It's not looking like it, because I would have expected it to get picked up right away. Okay, so we're moving on from that. I've got shallow seam right over here on the bank, or near the bank. On the other side. Not looking like it, but another one that was just worth a couple of casts. Okay. Now I have a nice looking seam right here. It's not very deep, but definitely a lot slower than the white water around it. There's a boulder that's still submerged, but it's creating a lot slower water. Oh, I just missed the fish. All right, just a couple more drifts in there. One of the challenges I've had so far in this segment until the last couple of minutes is that I had a pretty heavy downstream to upstream wind, and a lot of times, especially with the single fly, lifts up your leader enough that you don't get contact with your nymph early in the drift, so it hasn't helped, and I've missed a few extra fish that way, I think. But that's why I'm keeping a low rod angle and trying to keep that sider a little more horizontal than I might normally to keep the wind from blowing it, but also to provide some lateral tension for strike detection. All right, just a couple more shallow pockets here. And in that one, I'm actually still a little too deep even though I only have that 2.5 millimeter single nymph, but I lifted my sider up a little bit, kept the fly off the bottom that way, and on the next drift I caught a fish. So that's a really important thing. Just like anywhere else, if you're under the fish in water like this, they just don't see your fly. So the notion that you should be bouncing bottom all the time is just not true. That's a nice brown trout. Trout have their eyes on their heads above the midpoint, so if that fly is below them, they just don't see it. So if you're ticking bottom a lot where you think there should be a fish, either take off some weight, shorten your tippet. See you there, bud. Bye. See you later, brown trout. Either, if you're ticking bottom constantly where you think there should be fish, either shorten up your tippet, and you can do that by moving that wax sider around if you have one, or raise that sider off the bottom, or just hold it horizontally. Hold it on a little more horizontal angle to keep up the fly off the bottom. So on that one, the first drift, I tick, tick, tick. I still thought there was a fish there, so I lifted it up about 6 inches on the next one, and he ate right away. So I think the first one, he just didn't see it. But that second one, he was more than willing to eat it, simply because he was able to see the nymph that time. All right. Couple last spots here. I've got a seam just below some white water here. And I don't think I'm quite heavy enough now that I've got that wind blowing again from downstream to upstream. It's lifting up my leader a little bit. So I may leave that pocket alone for a second. And there was not a fish in that pocket, so that's good. At least I don't feel bad that I missed something. There we go. Same thing. There's a small pocket that's actually the cushion on the upstream side of a boulder here. Well, I might have to chase this guy a little bit. But I was too deep for that fish, and he got me around a stick. Okay, he's off. We're good. So I was too deep for that fish to begin with. I made, I think, 3 or 4 drifts through there that didn't get eaten, but it looked like a spot in this river that normally holds a fish. Pretty common type of spot for brown trout to tuck into. And so, progressively, the next couple times, I lifted it an inch higher and an inch higher to make sure I wasn't under the fish. And eventually, I think on about the 4th cast, maybe the 5th cast, he ate. So that's another important thing to remember. Yeah, fish will, in pocket water like this, they're gonna eat right away if the drift is good. But a lot of times you think the drift is good, and it may have been, but it might have been just too low in the column or too high in the column. So that's part of your presentation as well, obviously. Wow, this fish took me for a little bit of a ride here. Get him on that soft water on the bank and get him above me. There we go. That's a nice fish. Chubby. Really well built fish. See you later, buddy.